At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Dean, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's great to be with you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Well, I'm really grateful to have you on the show today. I know that if I understand correctly, September is actually Suicide Prevention Month. Is that correct?
It is. This is a big month for what we do throughout the year and throughout the years. This is basically when the entire world turns its attention to just the subject of suicide and why it's such an important topic to discuss.
Okay, well, what I'd love for you to do is kind of share your journey with the audience, your background and so forth, and what brought you to doing what you're doing and your focus on suicide, because I know you really have a huge focus and are contributing tremendously to suicide prevention.
Yeah, well, I have been speaking predominantly in high schools throughout America and different parts of the world since January 1st, 1993. I've spoken at over 4,300 events, and we have shared this message. It's a message that says God loves you. He's got a plan for your life, and because you're breathing, you matter. And we've shared it with literally millions of teenagers who come from all walks of life, every imaginable social class. And what makes our outreach a little different maybe is we never charge anyone anything. We freely come and just do what we believe we're called to do, and lots of doors open as a result of that. What began us in all this, I grew up in a pretty standard, if you will, American home. Became a Christian at 7 years old, but I had some defining moments in my life, Doug, that kind of changed my life. At 7, I became a Christian. At 15 years old, on a Wednesday afternoon at 3:40 in the afternoon, unbeknownst to me that it was getting ready to happen, but I was sexually abused, and 60 seconds changed the trajectory of my life. At 17 years old, I had made a vow that I would never tell anyone what had happened to me. At 17, I failed PE. Even though I played quarterback, taught tennis, and played golf, I was plenty athletic. I wasn't going to change clothes in front of anyone. At 18 and 19, my drug of choice was lying. I lied more than I ever told the truth because I didn't like me. And the second greatest commandment ever written is to love your neighbor as yourself. But if I don't love me, I can't love you. I can't give what I don't have. And so I was living this very non-authentic life, trying to just create an image that people would like, because I was so terribly broken and insecure. That went on for about 4 years, and at 21, I was through. I had just had enough. The pressure was too much. The life was just not worth living in my mind. But I said a real simple prayer one day. I said, God, if you're real, and I don't think you are, but if you are, and you've got something for me to do, prove it. And I tell teenagers, don't ever ask the creator of the universe to ask to prove to you that he's real unless you're ready. And 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in my office dialing a phone. And as I'm dialing this phone, off behind me to my left, I heard someone say, call mom. I swung around in my chair, saw no one, but the hair on the back of my ears knew to call my mom. And I did. And when I called my mom at that precise instant that I believe God spoke to me to do so, my mom was attempting suicide. She was dying. And I could hear the life leaving her body. And I remember running out of that office, getting into my car, drove up Interstate 75 in the United States. And as I got to my parents' home, from the outside in, everything looked fine. It was safe, secure, probably like where people live. But from the inside out, my mom was dying. I see millions of teenagers. And from the outside in, they appear to have it all together. But from the inside out, they're in their own private wars. That day, short version of this story is I got her to a hospital. And as we're driving, she says, Dean, I can't be dying. I said, Mom, you're not going to die, but you're going to have to choose to live. And the most important word in that sentence to me is not live, it is choose, because choices create circumstances. And I got to a point where when I got to the hospital, the doctors threw me against the wall, rushed me to the emergency room. And 45 minutes later, this ER doctor walked over to my dad and said, there is no medical reason to tell you what I'm getting ready to tell you. It is a, quote, miracle of God. Your wife is fine. You can go see her. I heard miracle of God spoken by that doctor, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You're real? And that day, I knew in my heart, I didn't hear any more voice, but I had a leading that I was supposed to begin traveling and speaking. And it took 3 or 4 years before I would ever find the path for myself, but I did. And so since then, it's been a constant message and messaging to high school teenagers, to prisons, to teen challenge centers, to churches, just a message where I go in and share my story and I unpack this whole thing on why suicide cannot be the option that we choose. And I'll just say this, and I'll kind of just quieten down, but I've learned this, that what you and I overcome oftentimes becomes our platform. And that is what happened to me.
Amen to that. And I found that to be so true. So
Yeah.
true. And that's quite a fascinating story. And for you, you never considered suicide, even though
No, I
you went through that whole thing.
never did. I was tired of living the life of being fake, plastic, and non-authentic. I wanted real. And when I discovered that he is real and that he has a plan for my life, that's when I got real intentional about getting some help and moving forward in a healthier lifestyle.
Okay. And obviously we're talking theologically here. You're Christian.
Yeah.
I have a firm belief also in the Savior and the Father. But I know a lot of the audience that may be listening may not have that type of faith. So as you're working with people and with young people particularly who may not have that type of background of faith, how do you work with them and how do we help the audience to understand that this is a general important topic and it's not necessarily that you have to have that faith, although there's no question that having that can make a big difference.
Sure. And that's a great question. What I share with audiences every time I speak, I begin, no matter where I am, with a very simple statement. And here it is. I'm not here to try to talk you into anything today. And here's why. If I could talk you into something today, somebody so much better than me could talk you out of it tomorrow. The thing about truth, and I talk about it in my book, is truth is always true. And I believe inborn into every human is a desire to connect with truth. And so when I talk about your life matters, I base it on 16 words that are found in one Bible verse. It's in Job chapter 33, verse 4, and it says this: the Spirit of God made you, and the breath of the Almighty gives you life. Teenagers ask me, they go, well, Dean, you don't know me. You don't know what I've done. You don't know my background. You don't know my backstory. And yet you tell me with such confidence that I matter. What do you base that on? And I always just smile and go, so happy you asked. Here it is. You matter for one reason. It's not your last name. It's not how much money your parents make. It's not your athletic ability, your theatrical ability, your academic ability. All those are what kind of gift you. But what makes you special, what makes the truth that you do matter comes down to one thing. You're breathing. You were never, God has never made a mistake. You were created on purpose, with purpose, and for purpose. And whether people believe in this God that I'm talking about or not, the reality is they were created. They didn't just happen. They're here on purpose. And as a result, I just invite people into a discovery of their own that says, well, wait a minute, I am here, I am breathing. And as a result, there must be something for me to do. And so it's the most, and there are a lot of people out there, Doug, who go, well, you're oversimplifying this message. And I very simply go, well, thank you for recognizing that. I am. And that's very intentional on my part, because it's a simple message.
And I think it's so important, as I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people on personal development, overcoming, suicide, those type of things. The one thing that I recognize is that there is this concept, as you mentioned, that there has to be this identity. There needs to be an understanding that within us, there is that light, there is that spirit, there is that godliness, whatever you want to call it. And even for those, as you say, that are not necessarily religious, need to know that, yeah, there's that life within you. And, so often our lives have become a story that we've told ourselves based on so many stories that we've been told by our parents and by religion and everything. And so here's one of the questions I have, and I always love to get into this, the root cause. Now, I will tell you, I've had 3 nephews that have committed suicide.
Mm.
And 2 of them were younger. One of them was actually a lot more mature and a lot older. And as I've looked at that, I wonder, what is the cause? Now it's easy, well, it's not easy, but to talk about how do we get to the point where we don't consider suicide as one thing. But what I've recognized is that there may be some causes in general that lead someone to that thought process. As you've done this, have you found that there are some general categories or causes that can cause this to happen?
Yeah, it's a couple of things to respond to that. One is I've talked with a lot of students who've attempted but survived, and I've talked to a lot of parents who have buried their children. And a lot of times, just recently, I was sitting with a family that I happened to know, and they reached out to me, and their child had ended his life. And I walked into their home, and I walked in with just this kind of this feeling of I don't have to have answers for them today. I think they just need to be heard. So I'm just going to sit and listen, and if I'm led to say something, I will. And I remember I sat down, and the dad was very angry, very angry. The mom was, extremely emotional, but she was more of she had it together. And they said, there were just no signs. We didn't see any signs whatsoever. And a lot of times teenagers who've attempted and who have survived have said to me, Dean, it's like there's this hopelessness that just overtakes us. There's just we see no hope for our future. And they begin to talk about how in their mind, they have this almost this dark, ominous, evil cloud that comes into their mind, is how they would describe it to me. And it becomes this overpowering, overshadowing portion of their mind. And then they hear this voice, and it's always the wrong voice, and it's to end their life. As a Christian, I go back to Jesus came to give us life and life more abundantly. The Bible talks about how there's an appointed time for everyone to be born and to die. Well, my belief is those appointments I'm not in charge of, and God doesn't need my help on either side of them. And so the hopelessness is the biggest thing that we encounter in public schools, private schools, Christian schools, alternative schools, young people who just say, I just don't see any track forward for me and for the life I want to live. And they literally buy this unimaginable evil lie, and it's always fast. Suicide, in my view, is the fastest death that exists on the planet today.
And it totally interrupts that plan of when they're to die,
Yes.
necessarily.
Yeah.
But here's for me, and you can correct me on this if you don't believe this, but I find that, and again, I think the important thing, and you kind of brought it up, we cannot blame anyone necessarily for those young people that commit suicide. And I think parents take such blame, feel so guilty. What could I have done? I didn't see it, so on and so forth. But I will say that in one particular case that I'm aware of, I really believe that medication.
Mm.
I know that one of my nephews was struggling a little bit in school. I was encouraged to put him on a little bit of medication, and I happen to have I've been studying this a lot, and I recognize that one medication goes to another, and ultimately, when my one nephew passed away, he was on an anti-anxiety drug that 6 months later, they realized that one of the side effects was suicide.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
and so I don't know if you get into that with parents at all about being so careful about the medications that their children are put on and looking at alternate ways
Yeah.
with learning disabilities. I know that I have one son that has some learning disabilities, and the school was saying, all right, we need to put him on Ritalin or whatever.
Right. Yep.
And I go, no way. And I happened to go to a workshop by a psychologist who was talking about this very thing. And he talked about the fact that in schools, we teach one way, and that's the only way. And yet our children have different ways of learning.
That's so true.
Some
So
are
true.
spatial thinkers. My son happened to be a spatial thinker and may have had some other issues that we've talked about now that he's much more mature. And what I did in his case is I bought him a Palm Pilot because he was very much the spatial thinker.
Yep.
And so what would happen, he'd be in class and a bird would happen to fly onto the window and he'd look over there and something would happen over here and he'd look over there. And, to the teacher, you really need some help. Your
Right,
ADHD or whatever that
right,
happens to
right.
be. And so I bought him a Palm Pilot. And I said, look, you take this to school and use this. And he focused on that, and it made all the difference in the world for him. Now, I will say I had a few teachers come to me and saying, he's changing the channel on our TV while we're trying to but the bottom line is that by giving him a focus, it made all the difference in the world. So, do you talk about medications at all with
I
parents?
don't, I usually do not get into that because that's just not, I'm not trained in that way. I'm not educated in that way.
Mhm.
I'm not against medication as long as it's the medication that's right for each individual child, and that's a conversation between parents and doctors. So I don't ever really go into that world just because I'm just not trained in that world.
And I happen to be against it. I
Yeah,
happen to be against it because I saw the result in one
yeah,
of my nephews. So as you look at some of the root causes, what is creating this story
yeah.
within their minds of hopelessness?
Well,
Uh,
one of the biggest things, Doug, we could talk about is the impact of social media globally on today's teenagers. Globally, every day in America and around the world, 5,600 teenagers attempt to end their life. 5,600. Pre-COVID, it was 5,240. In an arena that seats 12,000 people, that arena would fill up every 2.5 days with teenagers who in the previous 60 hours bought the lie. So one of the things that I talk a lot about in schools with teenagers as it relates to social media is, for example, in our outreach, in the last 25 months, we've had 163 million views of our videos on social media. Well, I'm thankful for that. I mean, every high school I go into, teenagers come up and go, "Hey, I watch your videos," and no matter where I am, it happens. And again, grateful for that. But notice I didn't say I count my likes. And here's the message that I share with parents, and because a lot of parents are on social and they're counting how many people like what I said today, or what. If you're still counting your likes, you have no idea how much you're truly loved. Views are one thing. Teenagers today are trying to figure out, how can I get more likes? How can I get more retweets? How can I get more people following me? And they're using filters. They're changing this. They're just trying to fit in. And I have met a lot of students who've either had dear friends in their life or attempt to end their life, or they've attempted because the peer pressure on social media to perform and to be accepted is off the charts. And so, in my view, social media was created to connect people, but it's become the most singular, isolating tool that the earth knows today.
well, and unfortunately, social media there's so much falsehood that's being
Mm,
generated as truth. I find it interesting as I'm listening oftentimes to something and I go, wait a minute, that can't be true. So,
right. Yeah.
I'll immediately do the research. I'll go to Chat GPT and say, okay, here's what's being said, true. And, no, it's not true. And yet there are bald-faced lies that are being told. And particularly with our youth, here they are being told something that they believe is true, which can so much affect their whole life and their whole thought process.
Yeah. It's and the reality is they're trying to find their value based on something that may or not be true, like you're talking about. And so my suggestion to teenagers is, why don't we just be the authentic version of who you truly are? And let's not worry about how many people are liking what we're doing or following us, because you know even with the number of people who follow us on social media, if I say something they don't like, they can hit one button and I'm gone off their screens, off their it's amazing to me. And the average teenager, according to the Center for Disease Controls in Atlanta, Georgia, the average teenager will today spend up to 9 hours every day on his or her device. 9
Wow.
hours.
Wow.
I grabbed my phone the other day, went to TikTok and just started scrolling. 48 minutes later, I looked up and I went, wow, that was addictive. Those are 48 minutes that I may never get back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're doing up to 9 hours a day. I mean, to me, that number just staggers me.
Well, and there's some other issues also because you look at that from social media, and there's no question that that's a major issue. But also, what about the imprints that these children receive, unknowingly necessarily from parents, unknowingly, or not necessarily unknowingly from schools, from society, from religion even, which I think we have to be careful about, to the point where, you know what, I'm not good enough.
Mm.
Do you address those issues at all?
Yeah, I do talk about it from I talk to parents about, you know, it's a very unhealthy process to try to remitigate your life to the life of your children. Meaning, if you're trying to get your kid to play a certain sport because you did and you want to relive those glory days, and that kid's not interested in that sport, but yet you're pressuring them to perform, you're setting them up for epic failure. If you are trying to get them to become something, because here's what I've seen so often is that broken teenagers become broken adults. And brokenness attracts brokenness. And when two become one flesh and they create brokenness until there's healing that comes. And so a lot of students to me come up to me and they'll go, you know, I just would love to be able to talk to my parents. I just don't know what to say. And I have so many parents say to me, I would love to talk to my teenagers. I don't know what to say to them. And I begin by suggesting, well, let's turn the phones off. Let's begin there. Put your phone away and just try to have a conversation. Because at the end of the day, teenagers still desperately, whether they realize it or not, are in desperate need of boundaries. And so many parents are trying to be their kid's best friend. Your teenager doesn't need you to be your best friend at all. They need what you offer as a mom, a dad, or a father and a mother. And there's a big difference. Dads give you what you want, but fathers give you what you need. And I'm seeing such a deficit in fatherhood where young people are like, well, you know, my dad's just never around. And for the parents listening to this, I can assure you, as someone who's done this for almost 34 solid years, teenagers spell love Time. They want your time.
Well, and they want communication. And you know what surprises me, as you say, broken parents cause broken children oftentimes. And
Yeah.
so, we get into this whole issue of how do I change myself first so that then I can be a positive influence for my children. Um,
Yeah. It comes, first of all, I believe it comes down to first acknowledging something needs to change. Something needs to be healed. Something needs to be fixed. For me, interesting story. I share this from stage a lot. I had made a vow when I was 15 that I would never tell anyone I'd been sexually abused. And I maintained that vow for 22 years. Didn't say it, no one ever knew. Married with 3 kids, and my wife didn't know. But there was a day that she asked me to go to a place called Home Depot, which is a massive, do-it-yourself kind of. That's not me. I was lost as a goose in there. But I went down aisle 21 and I turned right, and I literally walked right into the person who 22 years earlier had sexually abused me.
wow.
I squeezed my kids' hands so tight they both screamed. I just froze. Keep in mind, if you and I do not deal with our emotions will deal with us. They don't just magically disappear. I froze, squeezed their hands, turned around, walked out, drove home. My wife looked at me when I got home. She said, "What's wrong?" I said, Not right now. Give me a few minutes." Put our kids to bed. An hour later, we went outside on our front porch, and I said, I don't want to tell you this, but I need to tell you this. I said, I've never had the guts to tell anybody. But 22 years ago, I was sexually abused, and today I ran into the person. My wife took 2 steps back, her eyes filled with tears. I'll never forget this. And she said, "Dean, everything makes sense now. We've got to get you some help." And I share that to say, oftentimes we just bury the pain, we bury the whatever, we bury the incident, we bury the experience, thinking it's just going to go away. But yet, suddenly we're going somewhere and somebody cuts in front of us in our vehicle and we get so angry. We're not angry that somebody cut in front of us. That's a secondary emotion. That anger is being driven by something much deeper. Something triggered that. And so for me, I was invited into a Christian-based counseling appointment. Excuse me. And I didn't want to go. I had a lot of pride. And I thought, I don't need this. This guy's not going to help me. And my wife said, if you were diagnosed with a sickness, would you go to a doctor? I said, well, sure. She goes, no different. You're going. And so I went. And there was this 90-second stare off where this gentleman looked at me, I looked at him, and I knew this guy did not need me. I needed him. And I said, what would it look like if you and I were to do this? He said, it'd be a conversation. He said, I don't want to talk about your outreach. I don't want to talk about the people you reach. I don't want to talk about all the books you've written. I don't want none of that. I'm interested in you. And for me, that was something new, that somebody was really just interested in me. I said, okay, let's begin. That conversation lasted 11 years.
Wow.
Well, during those 11 years, I was asked a question, and this is kind of where I was going. And the question was this: will you forgive the person who abused you when you were 15? My immediate response, as a Christian, no, not even maybe. They were like, why? I said, it's not fair. I did nothing wrong. This question was then posed, well, was the cross fair? Meaning the cross that Jesus was hung on. I just kind of froze, kind of said, all right, I'll get back to you. Took about 3 or 4 days. But I did not go to the person, but I did forgive. And I would love to tell you that everything changed in that moment, but I felt nothing different. But, faith isn't about feelings. It's about obedience. And I just forgave. And I did it in a very sincere way. And it wasn't long thereafter, I woke up one morning and I experienced what forgiveness does. It sets us free. That person who sexually abused me could walk into an arena when I'm speaking, there's 15,000 teenagers there, could walk down to the front of that arena, sit on the front row, look directly at me, and it wouldn't faze me in the least, because I truly am free. And again, I go back to what you and I overcome becomes our platform. For me, I was sexually abused. I was emotionally abandoned by my mom when I was 4.5, 5 years old. I was rejected by people. I was bullied. I didn't think that my life mattered. I didn't feel like I was anything special. And yet I was so arrogantly confident, because it was a false sense of confidence on the outside. All of that somehow I was able to kind of get through became the platform of my life. And now all I'll talk about is how your life matters.
Well, and what's interesting, and we talked about it at the very beginning, that so often, parents will blame themselves. And as we're talking about the fact that, if you are troubled as a parent and have never really done that self-development and whatever, that can necessarily fall onto your children too. And yet, I think we need to understand that this is life. We are who we are, and we all experience these things. And oftentimes it has nothing to do with responsibility. What happened to you was not your responsibility. What's happened to me in my life, at least, the things that I could not control, I couldn't control. And
Right.
yet, so when you're working with parents, there's two things I want you to focus on for a minute. One is, how do they learn to overcome their own personal issues? It's interesting that your wife was so aware but didn't know why, and
Right.
and potentially, I don't know how it was affecting your kids, but I look at my
But it
children.
did.
I've got 4 kids, and there is no question. And we laugh about it now because we did develop communication, really open communication, but we laugh about the fact that how I influence them sometimes, oftentimes for the good, and they really appreciate that. And sometimes it's like, they struggle a little bit with that. So
Yeah.
as you work with parents, how do you help them, number one, to really recognize that their own personal challenges are affecting their children, and that for the good of not only themselves, but their children, doing that self work, such as you did, really will make a difference. Number two, learning the art of communication and
Yeah.
conversation, so that those children who really do need to talk to someone will feel comfortable enough to be able to talk to their parents. And
That's
number three,
okay.
I do this all the time. Number three, how do you help parents to get away from the guilt that they impose on themselves if they have had a child who has committed suicide?
Yeah. So on the number two question, the communication is so important. Um, I growing up with our family, my wife had this idea, and it was kind of it just worked. We did what we call high low. What was your high today? What was your low today? I've learned that if we can invite young people into conversations by leading with questions. What was it like today? What made that your high today? Or what made it not yours? What was your low today, and why? What happened in there? Because teenagers want to be heard and they need to be seen. So that's one thing. So the lines of communication, even if you feel like you're not doing it well, just keep showing up. Just keep showing up. With regards to parents who've lost a child to suicide and the guilt, I mean, first of all, no one knows what you feel. No one. Even someone who's experienced it in their own version, they don't know what you feel. And I think there's a place and a space there to just embrace the truth that, you know what, as bad as it is, you can't take responsibility for it. Even I've talked to some parents who were like, Dean, I just wasn't a very good parent. I pushed my child so hard. It, as remedial as this sounds, this is what I share with people. Yesterday ended last night, and tomorrow's not promised to anyone. So we've been given this gift called today. Again, as a Christian, and that's where I come from, my perspective. I believe that there is eternity. I believe that you will die and go either to heaven or hell. That's what I believe. Well, I believe there's a lot of people who've experienced suicide who were Christians. I believe those people are in heaven today. I just believe that. And I believe that if we can unpack the pain and not be afraid of the pain, but go, you know what? This has happened. It's real. It can control the rest of your life, or it can define the rest of your life. Pain seeks pleasure. If you see people who've really been through painful, just unimaginable painful situations, a lot of times they end up in addiction at some point because they're trying to just numb out. They're trying to anesthetize, and they're not bad people. They're just hurting, and they're trying to figure out, how can I get through the next, not the next day, the next 20 minutes, the next 2 minutes. So my thing when talking to parents is, I don't have all the answers. I'm not gonna. The most honest answer I give people is simply, I just don't know. I don't know why this happened to your son or your daughter. I don't have the answers for that. But I know that you're still here, and I know that you're still breathing, and I know that there's something for you to do. And how can you take this pain and turn it into purpose? What was your first question there on those three, please? The first one's left me.
Really helping the parents themselves.
Yeah. First, recognition's half the battle. I had to recognize that I was broken. And then I had to unpack, why was I broken? And then I had to unpack from that, what was that brokenness creating in my life? How was I being a husband? How was I being a father? How was I being a speaker? How was I as an employer? I mean, all of these different tentacles coming out of this one thing that would literally just dictate my life. Why did I like certain things? Did it feed a part of my ego that was unhealthy? I mean, it's truly an introspective, diagnostic look at our lives and going, if we're going to do this, let's do it in real time. Let's be real with ourselves. Let's be honest, because when we do that and we're not afraid of what we're going to find and discover, that puts us on a path, in my view, where we can then begin to see the healing process begin. We can see that healing come in. And here's what I've learned. When we are truly healed, it's noticeable. I've had people in my life that I've known for a long time come to me and go, I had someone in my family not long ago who was at an event where I was speaking. They came up to me afterwards and they were like, I don't know what's changed, but man, this message, I mean, it's unlike any other time I've ever heard you speak. And this person's been around for 30 years. And I was like, well, here's what's changed. Me. I realized I needed some things fixed in my life. And I'm not opposed to getting some help. I'm not opposed to digging down deep and going, what needs to be fixed? And if we're honest with ourselves, None of us are perfect. We're all broken people. We all have issues. Why run from them? Embrace what it is, believe for a way to fix it, and then move forward.
Well, amen to that. And you said something that really triggered me a little bit
Okay?
with the thought. You talk about mainstream Christianity, heaven and hell, and so forth. As I've studied, it was interesting since I'm in Thailand. I've been fascinated by the different philosophies, religions, whatever you want to call them. And it was interesting here in Buddhism that here you have the original teachings, and now it has moved into probably 5 or 6 different types of sects that believe and teach different things that have kind of been created by man's concept and interpretation. In Christianity, look how many churches and philosophies exist, and as you talked about that, and I think that one of the things, and I talk about this trying to be kind, but recognizing that, what, sometimes religion has created the very issues we're trying to get out of. For instance, for those that believe that we're born in original sin, I don't happen to believe that, okay?
Right.
But some do. Well,
Right.
what does that do? When someone listens to the scripture, be ye therefore perfect, well, how can I be that? When they don't
Right.
recognize that that has been misinterpreted from the original meaning.
Yes. Yep.
You've got that. When we talk about, committing suicide and, oh my goodness, they're not going to heaven, they're going to hell. Well, guess what? When Christ was on the cross and that guy next to him, who literally was a criminal,
Yep.
what did Christ say to him?
I'll see you later on today.
He said, "You'll be with me in paradise."
Yep.
All right. So here's the question. When he came back and was resurrected and saw Mary, what did he say to her?
Go and tell my disciples.
No, he said, "Touch me not." Why?
Oh,
Why?
isn't
Because
it?
I've not been to heaven yet.
Yep.
I've not been to my Father in heaven.
Yep.
So
Yep.
all of a sudden, we can recognize that, what? It isn't just heaven or hell. Let's open our minds up a little bit and realize that, there's something that he referred to as paradise that is a step before heaven and hell. And as we recognize that, and as we recognize that even that criminal was there with Christ in paradise, why can't we understand that our children, those that have committed suicide for whatever reason beyond necessarily their control, are going to be in a location where they could be and influenced by that goodness of the Savior, and it has nothing to do with heaven and hell. So it's interesting, I think, for people to understand that there are all different types of thoughts, processes, and beliefs and interpretation.
Right. Yep.
But if we move away from some of this just, black and white, that we can give them hope.
Well, and I think that's the word that really encapsulates what our mission is all about, is bringing what I call the intangible asset of hope into the lives of people who among us does not need more hope? I mean, it's, again, the simplicity of our message is just that. And, it's, to me, I look at all of these students that we get to talk with, and I see, they tell me their stories. I mean, people say, well, why do they tell you these things? And I have hundreds of stories of students who've shared their stories, their testimonies. And I always just kind of smile and go, I'm the safest guy they're ever going to talk to, because they know I'm leaving in 30 minutes, an hour, and I'll probably never see them again. So they just unpack these unimaginably painful stories of things that they have experienced. Why? Because everybody needs somebody with whom they can communicate, they can share. They need to empty out. They're looking for that. And that's why parenting is so important. I mean, you've got to be able, as a parent, to have the tough conversations. But there's a reason we were created with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. I believe we're supposed to watch and listen twice as much as we speak. And therein, I believe, lies the key to effective communication.
Well,
Listen.
and one thing that you did, which I think is so essential, so often we want our children to be transparent, but how can they trust us to be transparent until we're transparent with them? And
That's the deal.
when you finally told your wife your experience as a young person, that transparency, as you say, opened the path to forgiveness, to ultimate freedom for you. And I think it's important for parents to understand that if you want your children to be transparent, what's wrong with sitting down and saying, hey, son or daughter, I totally get what's going on here because here's some of the experiences I've had in my life, and be transparent. And the minute that that child sees that you're willing to share with them, doesn't that create a willingness and a trust within them to share with you?
Absolutely. It's like everything is a seed, I believe, that produces a harvest. Good seeds produce good harvest, bad seeds, bad harvest. If I sow a seed of being transparent with my kids, who are all adults now, but growing up, I learned that if I messed up in a big way or a small way, if I was unkind with my words toward my wife or to my kids or to one of our dogs, my responsibility was to immediately go, wait a minute, hey guys, you know what? I was wrong about that. I missed it. I should never have said that, or I shouldn't have said it in that tone. And I just want you to know I was wrong, and I apologize to you. Our kids grew up in that kind of an environment. Now, had I not come to the end of myself, gotten some serious help, I wouldn't have known to have done that. I would have just gone, well, it's just the way it is, lifestyle. I mean, how many, especially fathers, are out there going, well, I do this and I do that and blah, blah, and it's just going to be my way or the highway. That doesn't win anyone. It pushes people away. Teenagers are looking for the real thing. They want genuine authenticity across all platforms, and they can smell it and they can spot it when they see it, and they can smell it and they can spot it when they don't. I've been at a conference where I was one of the speakers, and it doesn't matter who it was, but there was a well-known speaker went up to speak, and he tried so hard to relate to those teenagers. They shut him down so fast. I mean, it was brutal. They weren't anywhere near him. And yet I talked to the same audience. Not that I'm such a great speaker. I'm just authentic. I'm just real. And people go, why are you just so real? Because for so long I was so plastic and fake. I for so long I wasn't. And I just got to the point where I was like, and I tell them, I show up in a button-down shirt, a pair of khaki pants. I got a microphone in this hand, a bottle of water in this hand. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to talk with you for 30 or 40 minutes, and I hope you get something out of it. But if you don't, I apologize, but I'm just going to give you what I got. I'm just going to be me. Every single school we've been in, everyone without fail, we could go back into, because the principals, the teachers, the students embraced the message, and they saw that I'm not trying, like I told you earlier, I'm not trying to talk people into believing something that I believe. I'm just trying to get people to have hope that there's a better future.
Well, and as we're running out of time, I wish we had more time. We could go on for another hour, I think, on this.
Yeah.
But this month is a special month, and as we look at that, what do you recommend? How do you encourage communities, parents? What can they do to really support our teens?
Well, in life, I believe we learn from one of four ways: failures or fathers, mentors or mistakes. Worldwide, teenagers are basically the same. They're looking for someone who cares. They want to know that you want to be invested in them. Mentoring is such a massive opportunity because there's so many people who've been successful in their lives, but the success did not fulfill them. They're looking for significance now. So what if you were to pour back into another generation coming behind you and share with them what you did right, what you did wrong, how you succeeded, how you perhaps failed? I believe that if I have some people in my life, some young people that hang out, with my family, and we pour into them. I'm not preaching at them. I'm not trying to convince them. I'm just going, hey, on a golf course, I did it the other day with my son and one of his dearest friends, and his friend wanted to talk, had some serious questions. And in between hitting golf shots, I just kind of poured into him. And being available is a big part. You know, one of the things that we've done with my new book is it's a book that I wrote for the specific purpose of getting people to understand that you do matter. I share my story in it, but then I unpack what I believe the reason to be as to why you matter. And it's really helping a lot of people. And so there's resources out there. There's investing time is out there. Mentoring is available to these students. Just getting engaged, getting involved, and showing up all makes such a big difference.
And you mentioned your book.
Yeah.
Share with the audience again the name of the book, how they can find it.
Yeah. The book's called You Matter, Finding Hope and Meaning in Everyday Life. It can be found on Amazon, or they can go to our website, which is simply youmatter.us, youmatter.us. Either one of those will take you right to it. The website gives you a whole lot of information on what we do, why we do it, how we do it. And then, of course, on Amazon, thankfully, in multiple categories worldwide since the book released, it's been #1. So it's helping a lot of people.
Wonderful. Dean, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for your time. And thanks
what an important topic. And folks, think about this. And, you know, I love the last part that you talked about, how we as individuals can make a difference in the lives of our teenagers and those around us, by listening, by opening up, by doing all of those things and being aware. And since this is such a special month for that, I just, you know, and I know you would too, encourage people to become aware of that, even if they haven't personally experienced it,
Yeah.
recognize that they too can make a difference.
No question. Everybody needs somebody. And if you'll be willing and obedient to just be used, opportunities will knock on your door.
Well, Dean, thank you.
Thanks so much, Doug.
Yeah, thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate it. And folks, thanks for listening. I hope this has made a difference, and I hope this will create a higher awareness of those around us, and particularly those teenagers that are struggling, and how we can individually make a difference, either personally by even developing ourselves or by getting involved in some of these organizations that are seeking to help. So anyway, this is Dr. Doug saying namaste.